Biology 160, Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology, continuing our lectures with the digestive system. So in this part of the lecture, we're going to take a little tour down through the digestive system and see the different functions in different places. The digestive system functions are controlled mainly by the parasympathetic system. So thinking about to the nervous system, we call the parasympathetic system the rest and digest. The reason we call it the rest and digest is because it's focused on controlling this part that we're talking about now, the digestive system. So let's go down through here and see how this happens. There's a number of triggers that, including reflex triggers such as when the organs stretch, the small intestine, the stomach, as they stretch, it signals certain chemicals or hormones to be excreted. It triggers the movement of these organs. And so now let's go down through and see how these things happen here. So we're going to start in the mouth. So in the mouth, we've already talked about how mechanical digestion and chemical digestion happen in the mouth. The main the main enzyme here is the salivary amylase that breaks down starch into maltose. The pharynx and esophagus, they have no digestive function. All they do is they move food from the mouth to the stomach. They're just a pathway. They're simple as that. They're just a pathway. So mechanical, chemical digestion start in the mouth, and then once we leave the mouth, we go down through the pharynx, the esophagus, down into the stomach. Before we get there, though, let's look at a little bit about this swallowing action. So we put the food into our mouth, we're going to chew it up. Once it's chewed, we're going to swallow, and there's a fancy word for swallowing called deglutition. And so next time you say you need to swallow, you can use this word instead, deglutition. So swallowing it's actually a complex process that happens. We really don't think too much about it. We've been swallowing longer than we can remember. I mean, ever since you were born, swallowing is a natural action, but all the things that have to happen are quite complicated. First of all, we have the buccal phase. The buccal phase, this is a voluntary part of swallowing. So the initial start of swallowing, you have control of, but once you get it started, it goes into an involuntary stage, and you have no more control. It's just going to follow the pathway all the way down. But at the beginning, we do have control. So this is voluntary. It occurs in the mouth. So we chew up our food, and we mix it with all the saliva that is being produced, and it becomes what we call a bolus. And saliva is interesting because it's constantly released in our mouth to moisten our mouth, keep our mouth from getting too dry. But in the presence of food, there's a trigger that tells our body to release more saliva. So there's a lot more saliva produced, and we're able to mix all this food up. And you want to mix your food up as much as you can to get it ready to go through the rest of digestion. And the starch is the main thing that's going to be broken down, but it also moistens and breaks the food up into smaller pieces, makes it better for the digestion to happen. There's also other triggers, so you can just smell food, and also that'll trigger the release of saliva. So once we produce this bolus, then you push that bolus to the back of your throat with your tongue to initiate the swallowing mechanism. So next time you swallow, think about what's happening, and you can feel as your tongue pushes that saliva or the food or whatever in your mouth back towards the pharynx. Once you get to the pharynx, it's no longer under your control. That's it. Once you decide to swallow, once you push that to the back of your mouth, then your body takes over, and that's all the control you have. So they call this the pharyngeal esophageal phase, named for the pharynx and the esophagus. And this is where it's going down. So what happens here is, so the food gets to the back of the mouth, and then it's going to start down through the pharynx. The problem here, though, is that in the pharynx, there's a number of places the food can go. So if you remember, if you think of the figure of the person, here's our figure. When you get down into that pharynx, this is the crossroads for a number of systems. So the respiratory, well, a number of systems, basically the respiratory and digestive, that's basically it. But there's a number of passageways that all join up in this part here. So the nasal or the nasopharynx is up above. You've got your respiratory tract, your trachea down this way, and then you have your esophagus down this way. So there's 3 different ways you could go. The only way you want to go, of course, is down the esophagus. So that means you've got to close off these other areas here. Oh, including the mouth. I guess there's a 4th way. So the food could come back up this way, and you don't want that to happen either, because you want it to get down the esophagus so you can digest it and use all the food. So what happens here is the soft palate, as you swallow, the soft palate is going to raise up, and the uvula is going to cover that nasal passage. So the food is not going to be able to go up this way. Your tongue cuts off your mouth so that the food can't go back out the front of your face. And then the larynx raises up and causes the epiglottis to fold down and cover the trachea so that this pathway is no longer available. So the only place the food can go is down the esophagus, and that's what we want. So we're able to do that. Of course, you've had situations where maybe you've had food go up this way, you've probably had food go down this way, and so sometimes these control mechanisms can be messed up. So for example, if you're trying to talk while you're trying to eat, in order to talk, the air has to come up the respiratory tract, and so the epiglottis has to be open, and so you're trying to swallow here and you're trying to talk, and epiglottis doesn't get closed, and you can get some food down in here and suddenly you're coughing, or you may laugh while you're swallowing or something like that, and the food will come rushing up out your nose, or the milk, or what. Anyway, you've probably seen things like that. So this isn't a perfect system. It can be broken down according to the other actions you're doing, but if you're just swallowing, then it works well and gets that food where it needs to go. Then once that food gets down into the down into the esophagus, not the epiglottis, past the epiglottis into esophagus, then the esophagus takes over, and using peristalsis, these movements of the muscle, it's going to push it down the esophagus, clear down to the stomach, and this is where the cardioesophageal sphincter is, and as that bolus, so at this point we call the food a bolus, as it comes in contact with that, it's going to open up and it's going to dump that bolus down into the stomach. And so now we're down into the next phase of our digestion here. So now we're into the stomach. So in the stomach, we already talked about gastric juice. Gastric juice is it's kind of like the saliva of the stomach. It's secreted in order to break down the food in the stomach, and also to start churning it up as well. There's neural and hormonal factors that come into play here. Gastrin is a hormone, and it is released by the presence of food or rising pH in the stomach is going to release this gastrin. Gastrin triggers the release of gastric juice. And so what we're releasing here is protein digesting enzymes, pepsin. Initially, though, it is pepsinogen, and then with the action of pepsinogen, and then with the hydrochloric acid that is also released, that pepsinogen becomes pepsin, and then also some mucus. Because the hydrochloric acid here, you want to protect the lining of the stomach. So hydrochloric acid, very corrosive, it can break down cells, and so this mucus lining helps to shield those cells from the hydrochloric acid. You've probably heard of an ulcer before. An ulcer can be caused by a number of things. One of them, a bacterial infection. But what's happening in an ulcer is bacteria are attacking the lining of your stomach, and they're breaking down that mucus lining so that the hydrochloric acid can then start to eat away at the cells inside your stomach, and so you get this really painful ulcer. There's also problems that can happen with heartburn. And in heartburn, what's happening is this pyloric sphincter here, this cardioesophageal sphincter, the pyloric is at the end of the stomach. Cardioesophageal sphincter isn't closing as well as it should, and it's not keeping the food from getting back up into the esophagus. So as the stomach is churning the food back and forth, some is spilling back up into the esophagus. The reason this is a problem is because once the food is churning in the stomach, it has a very low pH. It becomes very acidic. And so as it moves back up into the esophagus, the esophagus does not really have any sort of protection from this acidic food, and so it starts to burn the cells here, and they become scarred, and can cause a lot of problems, and also pain associated with that as well. And so that can cause a lot of problems. Another thing to think about with this low pH, you often see in people that are bulimic, where they're eating food and then forcing themselves to vomit it out. Because, again, it's a low pH, people that are bulimic often have very bad teeth, and the reason is because this very acidic food is coming back up through their mouth, and so the acid is starting to eat away at their teeth as well. So you want to keep this acidic stuff in the stomach and move it and keep it moving through the digestive system. Alright, so we do need a very acidic, as we said, we need a very acidic situation here in the stomach for that pepsin to be created. And then, but also, this is an interesting thing as well, microorganisms. So as we're eating food, this is a place that a lot of microorganisms like to get into our body, is through our digestive system. So the very acidic conditions here in the stomach can help to keep those microorganisms from getting into it. So those acidic conditions will kill the microorganisms. Not all microorganisms, though. There are some that, there's a number of ways they can get around this. One of them being that there are some that form a kind of a protective shell around themselves so that the acidic conditions don't affect them, so then they get down into the digestive tract. So it's not a perfect system. It doesn't kill all microorganisms, but it can keep a lot of them out. The digestive system, the digestive proteins in the stomach, the digestive enzymes in the stomach. Pepsin we've already talked about, breaking down proteins. There's one other one called renin, and don't confuse this with the other enzyme, renin, which is spelled with just one N instead of two. This renin, it works in digesting milk, and it's mainly found when you're an infant. As you become an adult, you stop producing this because you're not really supposed to break down milk anymore. I say that with quotes around it, but a lot of Europeans and Americans often, we drink milk as an adult, but we don't produce this enzyme anymore. There's no absorption in the stomach, except there are two things: alcohol and aspirin. They can get through the lining of the stomach and into the bloodstream that way. So, but other than that, there's no organic molecules that are absorbed in the stomach. And then we have the propulsion. In the stomach, we have the churning going on. We have peristalsis to move food from one end of the stomach to the other. And then we have the pyloric sphincter that goes into the pylorus. And in the pylorus, it's kind of like this little section where food will enter in order to get into the small intestine. The pyloric sphincter is very small, so that only a little bit of what we now call chyme, so as the food has entered the stomach and has been acidified, it becomes chyme, and so the pylorus can only let out a little bit at a time, about 30 millimeters, not much at all. So it takes a while for the stomach to empty after you've eaten. And this shows this here. So the peristalsis is moving this way, and then the pyloric sphincter will open just a little bit, and then release just a little bit of food, and then it will move into the small intestine. You don't want to overwhelm the small intestine. So it does most of the digestion, but for digestion to happen, you've got to be able to have those enzymes come in contact with all of the food. So if you put too much food in the small intestine, you're not going to have the right conditions to do the digestion. It's not going to digest right. So in this case, just put it in a little bit of at a time, and so as it's moving this way, it's going to signal that it wants more food coming. So now we've left the pylorus. Now we're into the small intestine. We started as food. We became bolus. Then went to chyme, and now we're in the small intestine. We're going to finish our digestion here. We've talked about the enzymes in the small intestine, the brush border enzymes that do protein digestion, and also the breakdown of simple sugars. The brush border enzymes are produced by the cells of the small intestine. The other enzymes come from the pancreas, and they carry out a lot of digestion as well. So starch from the amylase that is produced in the pancreas, pancreatic amylase, breaks down the starch. Protein digestion happens here. Lipase comes from the small intestine. Digestion of nucleic acids, we talked a little bit about nucleic acids before, come come from the pancreas as well. So the pancreas is the main digestive organ. This is where all these larger molecules are broken down, and then the brush border enzymes can kind of finish off the job. Also, the pancreas produces alkaline juices that help to neutralize the acidity of the chyme. So in order for the enzymes of the stomach to work, it has to be very low pH. But in order for the enzymes of the small intestine to work, it has to be neutral or slightly alkaline conditions. And so this alkaline material takes that acidity and makes it so it's no longer acidic. Pancreatic juices of the small intestine are controlled by nerves, the vagus nerves, and then also hormones such as secretin and CCK. And these hormones travel in the blood, and they stimulate the pancreas to release the enzymes and the products that they have. So here's a little picture showing this situation here. Here's the vagus nerve coming down this way. Vagus nerve comes from the brain, and it's going to stimulate the organs of the digestive organs, the pancreas, notice the gallbladder as well. So chyme is going to come from the stomach into the duodenum, and in that case, the cells are going to release secretin and CCK. And these hormones will then enter the bloodstream, and they'll travel around the bloodstream and go to the pancreas, and that's going to stimulate the release of juices into the small intestine. And then the other hormones cause the liver to secrete bile, and also can stimulate the gallbladder to release bile. So notice how these hormones are released by the small intestine. They come back around, trigger the pancreas and the liver to release more digestive juices so that we can continue the digestion. So by the time we finish our traveling through the small intestine, all of the organic molecules, most of them, have been broken down, and they've also been absorbed. So once they're broken down to their component parts, they're absorbed, and they're being transported to the liver by the hepatic portal vein that we've talked about in the circulatory system, or also in the lymph. They can move, the fats can move in that way. Water is also absorbed all the way along the small intestine, and we want to pull out as much water as we can from the food that we're eating. Then through the movements of peristalsis, what's remaining, everything that's left over after we pull out all the nutrients, all the carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids from the food, everything that's left is going to be pushed by peristalsis, and we're going to move into the large intestine. Segmentation also is happening, is the mixing of the digestive juices in the chyme in order to do all the digestion. But now we're going to do the peristalsis, and we're going to move into the large intestine. There's no digestion that happens in the large intestine. There is some absorption, as what is left over from the small intestine still has some water, and so as we move along the large intestine, most of the rest of the water is going to be reabsorbed from what's left. We leave a little bit. Our body leaves a little bit of water so that the feces can smoothly move out of the body, but just enough in order for that to happen. No digestive enzymes, but there are a lot of bacteria inside our large intestine. These bacteria are okay though, because these bacteria are working with us in order to help us do digestion. You've probably heard of E. coli. You may have heard of E. coli in terms of E. coli infections or deaths that come from E. coli. But we all have tons and tons of E. coli bacteria inside our large intestine living there, and we need them there. So they help us break things down. But they can be bad if they get out of our digestive system in our feces and they get back into our water and we eat E. coli. Then that's a bad thing. They become pathogenic, and then they can lead to sickness and death and things like that. But the bacteria help us to they produce and we absorb some vitamins, such as vitamin K and vitamin B. And then they also release gases. This is where the gas that you associate with digestion comes from. And then everything that's left after that is now become feces, and we're just trying to get rid of that, defecate it out. basically what is left in your feces is undigested food. There's some mucus. There's a lot of bacteria in your feces. So a lot of that bacteria is going to end up being excreted from your body, and then there's just a little bit of water left over. The movement of the large intestine also happens through peristalsis, similar to the esophagus, the stomach, and the small intestine. But in this case, they're very slow movements. They maybe only 3 or 4 slow movements every day. So we call this sluggish peristalsis. But they're moving a lot of material. So if you compare the diameter of the large intestine to the small intestine, these are moving a lot of material. So just a slow, powerful movement over time. And then the feces is eventually going to reach the rectum. And then that causes us this reflex that we need to go and defecate, basically. We talked a little bit about the internal sphincter. And this is involuntary sphincter that opens up, and that tells us, okay, it's time. But then we have the voluntary external sphincter as well that we have control over, and so we can decide when to actually defecate and remove the feces from our digestive system. And there you go. So we started as food coming into the mouth. We became bolus as we moved down into the stomach. There we mixed and became acidic and became chyme, got into the small intestine. We were totally digested. We got into large intestine, became feces, and then we were defecated out, and we've made it through the human digestive system.